Hey everyone, and welcome to Hero Blend number 4. For the past couple weeks we've been talking about all the movie stuff that's been happening in the comic book universe, but this week we're changing things up and instead focusing on television. There have been a lot of developments with the new Gotham series and the Flash pilot, so stay tuned for a great conversation. And we are back with Sean O'Connell, movie content director of Cinema Blend. Welcome back, Sean.
Good to have you. Good to be back. I'm sorry.
Yes,
Thank you for having me back.
Show, damn it. This is my show.
Yeah.
We have a show on Mondays.
I'm a happy guy.
So, I mean, these past 3 weeks we've been talking about all the developments in the movie universe, comic book wise. I mean, obviously a lot of stuff's been going on. But today what I want to focus on is the stuff that's going on in the TV world. And so, like this past week, the big developments have been with the two series. Well, not even the series. You had the Flash pilot that's being developed at CW, and you have what is now going to be the Gotham series, which on Fox, which is the series that follows the early origin stories of Detective James Gordon. So actually, let's first start by jumping into the Gotham series. First off, like, what do you think about kind of this approach to this story and this direction for this series?
I think that it's interesting because, to me, every time we get this new iteration of the Batman universe, we have to sort of go back and reboot, and that upsets certain fans. So the idea of doing a prequel with younger characters, it's going to be a younger James Gordon, isn't that right? And then a young
played by Ben McKenzie, who's best known from Southland, who again is kind of a cop character, so he's got that experience going for him. But yes, it is a much younger version of Gordon. That's definitely true.
So are they trying to do Smallville? Like, is that what it's trying to be?
Well, what's interesting about it is that it's Gotham, but it's following. It sounds like what they're doing is kind of following the Batman Year One by Frank Miller. You're doing his kind of the James Gordon side of that story, but not doing the Batman side of that story, where Batman is becoming Batman. Essentially, from what we've heard, is that the series is going to be featuring a young Bruce Wayne. But it is purely a James Gordon series, and we're going to be following the Gotham Police Department. We've already seen a number of the characters being cast. I mean, just today we heard about Donald Logue being cast as Harvey Bullock, which, personally, I love that casting. What do you think?
I like that casting a lot, too. And I guess that's what speaks to how I feel about this show. I go into all of these projects with an open mind, and I think that they can work. But you are only going to be able to coast on a couple of episodes with the name recognition and the fact that you're introducing these characters that people are familiar with, because if you're not interesting, people are going to drop you. And for that, I point to Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because I'm one of the people who gave it a few episodes, and it just didn't hold my interest. And everything I'm reading about it tells me that they finally got into a groove and it got much better. But I tuned in just because it was Marvel, and it didn't hook me right away. So the same thing is going to be with Gotham. I'll tune in because I'm interested and I like the characters. But if it's not, engaging right off the bat, then I'm not going to stay with it. But if they're working towards building a larger cinematic universe or DC universe where you're interchanging between movies and television shows, which is where I think a lot of these franchises are going to have to go, and I keep pointing to the Dark Tower model of sharing, whether it's a Netflix deal or a network getting involved, and then you have some feature film components tied to it, and I think we're going to have to get that way with Justice League eventually too. Then I'll try harder to stay with it, but really it has to be entertaining from week to week.
Sure. And that actually does bring up an issue, which is that, I mean, one thing that we've known about DC and Marvel movies, one thing that DC definitely has an advantage is that all of its characters in the film universe exists within Warner Brothers. The problem that Marvel's been having is that you have Spider-Man over at Sony, X-Men over at Fox, and it's a split universe. That is kind of the problem that DC has on television, because yes, most of the DC Comics characters are on the CW, which is Warner Brothers Television Network. They have Arrow, which is obviously leading into the Flash pilot. It's a spinoff. But Batman belongs to Fox, which has had those rights since the Adam West television series back in the 60s. So even if we wanted a giant DC universe, let alone split between the film universe and the TV universe, we can't even get necessarily Batman to arrive on a CW series. So it's weird that and it's unfortunate that these kind of rights issues really block fans from the content that they really want to see.
Well, what I find interesting is that when we were growing up, Batman was a dominant television show. I mean, it wasn't until Burton tried to, but when Burton sort of revised him, that they pushed making him into a continuing film franchise and all these different formats. But
yeah, unfortunately, my Batman television series was the Batman the Animated Series of the 1990s. But it's the same. I know exactly what you mean, though.
But if that's what they ultimately, what I guess we're trying to get at is that from a DC's perspective, don't they want to drive everybody back to the comic books? Don't they want to make these characters household names so that you're ultimately exploring more comic book options? Or do you really think that the movies are the end game?
Well, I mean, the movies are, at this point, I have to imagine the movies are what really makes the money, right? I mean, obviously comics are they've existed for centuries and centuries, but the movie industry comic book movies are where it's at in Hollywood these days. So, I mean, it's hard to say if the comics are driving towards the movies or the movies are driving towards the comics. It's definitely an interesting time in that respect.
Well, I think that DC is more successful in terms of developing their television properties, because you brought up Flash, and we're hoping that that's going to develop into a series. Let's talk about that.
And as I was just saying, it's after Arrow, which has, after a rough start, I mean, the first couple episodes of Arrow are not particularly great, but once that show gets going, it's been actually pretty solid through its second season so far. I'm excited to see more of it. But yes, I agree that DC has done better with their TV properties than Marvel has.
Now, do you think that is going to help them eventually if they try, if they do get to a Justice League? That we've had this conversation before. If they get to a Justice League, do they pull the Flash and the Arrow characters from those shows, or can they not?
You know, they probably can. It's probably within. I'm sure, because all the characters belong to Warner Brothers. The question is whether or not they actually will. I definitely see the advantage of it, only because I'm like you. I'm a total continuity hound. I love the idea of these larger universes. It's why I've been so excited about what Marvel's been building with all of their solo films, plus the Avengers, plus S.H.I.E.L.D., plus their Netflix deal. That's really what you want to see. That said, it doesn't seem like that is what Warner Brothers, or really even necessarily the guys behind Arrow, are thinking, because Stephen Amell, the star of Arrow, has said that there is no connection between the Justice League and between the developing Justice League DC Universe and film world and the Arrow series and what's developing on television. So for right now, it does seem like that, unfortunately, is going to stay separate. Whether or not that's a good thing, it's kind of hard to say.
But with Marvel, they're specifically saying that the events of Captain America, the Winter Soldier, are going to influence their next season. So they're essentially saying you have to sort of keep up with both properties. And I find that very interesting, too, because I wonder how many people are sticking with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., or whether it's going to become easier for you to go back and sort of catch up on, sort of binge watch through a season and try and catch up before a Marvel movie hits.
Well, honestly, I think at this point they're just it's essentially the same thing with the comics. The comics can drive to the movies can drive to the television show can drive back to the movies, and the movies can drive back to the comics. It's like it does seem to be in their it does definitely seem to be advantageous to these studios to try and create something along those lines. But unfortunately, it does seem like that they're not 100% on board with doing that. Maybe because it's more complicated than we could possibly imagine. Maybe it's just too much to handle. Maybe it's too many departments that have to overarch. I mean, it's a weird, wild universe. But at the same time, I'm very excited to see what DC has coming on television. As mentioned, the Flash series, or not Flash series. I can't call it that yet. The Flash pilot. It's coming. I've liked what I've seen from Grant Gustin so far on Arrow in his 2-episode appearance. They look like they have a good grip on the character. It looks like Barry Allen could just be this fun kind of guy who really just ends up loving the idea of being a superhero. And, if they can get that into a series, that sounds pretty damn great.
Now, what if, hypothetically, they roll out the Flash as a character and it just falls flat? It's not someone that they accept. Does that keep him out of Justice League eventually, or do they try it again in the movie in a different format?
That is a very good question, and frankly, it's something that also that DC is dealing with Green Lantern, simply because you had the Ryan Reynolds movie, which did not do well, which both failed with critics and audiences, and but the way that they might be dealing with that is by moving on to a different Green Lantern. It looks like, I mean, the heavy rumor is that Dwayne Johnson might play John Stewart. So, and that would solve their problem. So could that mean that we don't see a Barry Allen Flash in the Justice League if the Flash potential pilot / series doesn't work out? It's kind of a web, but honestly, it's them taking challenge. It's them basically taking on challenges, and honestly, it may not even be that bad because, I mean, if Batman is going to exist, well, I guess he's not going to exist on Gotham. But I mean, you've had television series and movies over like linking before. Maybe it's something they can get away with.
Here's a question for you: do you feel that that Marvel and DC are overextending themselves because we now have Arrow, Flash, a Gotham series with Marvel? They've announced these plans for all of these Netflix shows. Daredevil. Is it Luke Cage? Was Luke Cage confirmed? I mean, we're going to have
Iron Fist, Jessica Jones, and Daredevil.
We could potentially have, what are we talking, 10 different television shows if Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. keeps going? I mean, that's a lot of television shows for stories, for characters, and we're not even touching on the feature films. That's just TV shows.
I'm just going to say it. Being the comic book fan that I am, more the merrier. I want to see all of these guys every single week. It's going to be great. I can't wait to see more of them.
Okay, all right. I'm not saying that I disagree. I'm just afraid that there aren't enough interesting storylines. Because it's just too often we see these shows and sitcoms particularly that come out, try and create something new, something original. After a while, they have to fall into a pattern and keep cranking out original episodes. God bless the shows that are able to stay on the air as long as they are and keep coming up with original content and creating new things. Eventually, they just start recycling their own ideas, and I'd like to see, you know, some of these shows. And the interesting thing too, now you said it with Arrow, it got off to a slow start, but then it found its groove. If they keep getting off to slow starts, if this Daredevil movie or TV show hits Netflix and isn't good right off the bat, are people going to give it the time? Are people going to stay with it? We're not loyal audiences anymore. We need to be entertained right off the bat. So I'll be interested to track to see how all of these shows do for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Sean, thanks so much for hanging out with me this week, and we'll have to do this again soon.
Absolutely, man. I look forward to it.